Hello, my name is Doug Frost, and I want to give you a little background about Bolgheri wines and the article that I wrote for Grand Mark. I think that there's some interesting things happening there. I don't think I'm alone in that, but I think it helps to kind of see some pictures or see some maps to get a sense of why things are as they are there. So, if I may, I'd like to just do a little screen sharing, as we do in this world, this new Zoomy world, and obviously Italy. When we're talking about Bolgheri, we are definitely going to find our way here to just a little spot right about there. Okay, it is a little place, and certainly in comparison to the vastness of Tuscany or Chianti, for that matter, it is just a handful of producers, really 5 dozen maybe, not even quite, and has a relatively recent heritage from the from the 1940s, I should say. The Marchesi Incisa della Rocchetta had started planting some Cabernet Sauvignon and some Cabernet Franc, really just as a family plot, to have some juice to make into wine and something nice to do in this beautiful little bucolic spot down by the ocean, or I should say the Tyrrhenian Sea. And eventually, it was turned into a wine that was so good that when Giacomo Tacchis and Piero Antinori were really now leading the charge, they inserted it rather cleverly in the 1972 Sassicaia into a Parisian tasting against top Bordeaux estates, and it won. So that kind of changed the fortunes, not just of Sassicaia, not just of Antinori and Rocchetta, but indeed of Bolgheri itself. So let's understand a little bit better about where we are. Again, this is Tuscany, and we're going to be, here, but in many ways, we're talking about the Maremma itself, which is a larger area of which Bolgheri is just a small portion. The heritage of Tuscany is such that today, I think we take it pretty seriously, but I'm an old enough fart here that I can tell you that I remember when it was not really taken very seriously. And it was to some degree the super Tuscans that helped change that mindset, of which Sassicaia has to be considered one. Tignanello, which was also Antinori's product in Chianti, was considered one as well. And what made them super Tuscans was that they were Tuscan wines that were really, really good, if not super, but they didn't follow the rules of the day. And the rules of the day in Chianti in particular were that you could not make 100% Sangiovese wine. Why not? Because it hadn't been done that way. Because there was indeed a formula of certain grapes. Now, Sangiovese is what I'm talking about here. You will sometimes see Prugnolo Gentile from Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, and it's Sangiovese. Or you may sometimes see Brunello, as in Brunello di Montalcino. What I would say to you is that it is an irony that Chianti would not give 100% Sangiovese wines a Chianti label for really up until 30 years ago, because it's an irony, because Brunello is 100% Sangiovese, and it was arguably the best wine made in Tuscany. Certainly most people believed it to be so. And yet, well, these things have changed. But as I say, this for people of a certain age, we still remember when it was not so, when all these appellations didn't exist, or at least were not well understood, not well known. And indeed, when we talk about Carmignano in particular, it was understood that some Cabernet Sauvignon was part of the relatively recent tradition of Carmignano, and that was okay. But if you added Cabernet Sauvignon to your Sangiovese alla Tignanello, oh, no, you cannot call that a Chianti. So there was a disagreement certainly about what was classic Chianti, partly because it is also true that Chianti once upon a time was a white wine in the 19th century. So white grapes were required in Chianti, again, up until about 30, 40 years ago. Now, here you can see Bolgheri right along the coast. And what we're going to see when we look at Bolgheri, we're going to understand that the closer you are to the coast, the more marginal is your climate, and the more up in the hills you can get, maybe the more sheltered you are, and in many cases, the more likely it is that you're going to produce consistently good wine. The formula, however, allowed white grapes, indeed required white grapes. The formula indeed required that Sangiovese not be the sole red grape as well. But things have changed since the DOCG was allowed in 1984. So you could back it off to 2% white grapes. You could have Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Syrah. And that non-Classico, that's to say not in the Classico district, could have an additional 5 to 10% Canaiolo Nero, which is a classical grape. Malvasia or Trebbiano, Malvasia being often the white grape that people utilized back in the day, and a maximum of 10% Cabernet Sauvignon. If you're a little confused by all these numbers, don't worry. These are Italian rules, which are, let's face it, suggestions more than they are rules. But nonetheless, the whole idea of Super Tuscan became part and parcel of Italian wine, but certainly of Tuscan wines, because the best wines were not following the standard rules. That has clearly changed. The standard rules also allowed for something called Fiasco. The Fiasco is the old wicker basket, which is usually perfectly draped in candle wax and looks really good in a funky old Italian joint like my dad used to like. But as a marketing ploy, it was a fiasco. Can we just call it what it is? That's to say, everybody just assumed Chianti was cheap stuff that came in a wicker basket, which probably cost more than the wine. That is no longer something that you see around. Governo here, governo is a term to describe an old style way of making wine, which, if you will, allows the greatest amount of juice to be extracted from grapes. That's to say, you make a wine, but you haven't harvested all your grapes yet. So what you do is you make a wine and you drain the wine off of the skins, but you leave the skins, and then you have your second selection, if not even sometimes your third selection of grapes, and you dump them in with those grape skins, and you create another fermentation there, and you get just a little more stuff out of those grape skins because there's money in that stuff. So Governo makes kind of a rustic, maybe even sometimes funky style of wine, so you don't see it much anymore. But back in the day, Chianti has its subzones, and I don't wish to paint everything with the same brush, but I think it's important to understand that, of course, Chianti Classico is the classical area. It has grown over the years, but certainly many of these areas within produce some of the loveliest wine that Sangiovese can manifest anywhere in the world. But I also want to give a shout out to Rufina, because Chianti Rufina also produces great stuff, and without trying to be cast aspersion on the rest of the wines, the rest of these sub zones typically make good but not great wine. However, there is Brunello di Montalcino, this absolute sweet spot for the Sangiovese grape, herein known as Brunello. And I love these wines, don't get me wrong, but I do want to say for the record that Brunello di Montalcino to me is hit and miss. There are many wines which have their 2 years in oak, or even in the case of Riserva, 2.5 years in oak, and are a bit dried out to me. And so I am careful on which Brunelli I choose to stick in my cellar, I choose to drink. And on top of that, I would say you have this category known as Rosso di Montalcino, which is, again, created a few decades back to allow a place to take your young vines, your declassified wines, and certainly those wines don't spend a lot of time in oak. And you know what? One of the greatest values in the wine world is Rosso di Montalcino. I said it. I actually probably drink, well, not probably, I definitely drink more Rosso di Montalcino than I do Brunello. Really? Because it's good, okay? It doesn't cost a fortune and it's good. Don't hate me. Don't hate me for that. There are, of course, these other Tuscan appellations I mentioned previously, Carmignano, which allows Cabernet Sauvignon. And then we finally, in the case of Bolgheri, we finally get some love, some respect, even though it's 5, 6, 7 years after Sassicaia has had this tremendous victory in '78, and Bolgheri is on the map without any question. So they give it a DOC, but for white wines and rosés only. What the hell, I'm going to say. It took them until 1994 to elevate Bolgheri to include its reds. and of course, to allow a Bolgheri Sassicaia DOC in 2013, it seems like it could have been done a little quicker, don't you think? I think we probably could have done that. But okay, let's talk about Bolgheri. There are about 60 producers there. There are 55 in the consortium, so the remainder just don't belong to the consortium. And as the standards go in Tuscany, it's a relatively small area, over 3,000 acres, but all isolated right there along the coast that are actually planted. And as you can see here, the dominant grape, Cabernet Sauvignon, the secondary grape, Merlot. And then we get into small amounts of Cabernet Franc. Wish there was more, should be more. Petit Verdot, most people think it's really, really crucial there. Syrah, and then a tiny amount of Sangiovese. It is that Sangiovese could prosper there, but these other red grapes, which are well proven to be fascinating grapes in many places in the world, and certainly can make long-lived wine, they're doing well here in places that they, throughout Italy, they don't necessarily do so well. So it's not surprising that they're dominant because they're proven. Secondarily, because they're almost singular within the country of Italy in being able to succeed here. And then I think most importantly, what you're seeing in Bolgheri is a new look at these grapes. Because yes, there's coastal areas where these grapes prosper, but in Mediterranean Europe, there may not be any other particular areas that I can point to. Remember, Bordeaux is Atlantic Europe. It is an Atlantic coastal area. And indeed, it's a 90-mile long harbor. I'm not sure that it's quite so coastal as it is at least associated with the marine climate there. This is distinctly coastal. And it is, I think, a unique look at these grapes and the way they function in that particular setting, not to mention it's an Italianate setting with that particular set of aromas and flavors. I think it's a different look at these grapes than we see anyplace else in the world, and I find that very exciting. There are white grapes here, Vermentino. It can be at times really quite exciting, and you'll see people spice things up with a little bit of Viognier or Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, if you're breaking the rules, why not break the rules, right? So here you have a look at Bolgheri, and from stem to stern here, as we go from the west to the east, from the coast, we're only talking 2, 3, 4 miles in many cases. So I will certainly maintain that the closer you get to the coast, the more it is that you're dealing perhaps with marginal conditions. And I think, frankly, the less consistent your wines are going to be. When we start talking about places like Tenuta San Guido or Ornellaia and Maceto, we're going to be up here. Okay, well, let's look at them a little more closely here. And now you can see how so much of it really is, I'm on the beach, you know, and then I'm up in the hills, and everything is, how can I find myself in a sort of medium ground between those two? And so there you have it. I think that's a nice little map about it. And look at these blue areas here. These are all owned by Tenuta San Guido. Sassicaia is the best advertisement I can give you for how amazing and great these wines can be, and how long-lived they are, and how, at this point, proven they are. We have decades of evidence that these wines are special and that this place is special for these grapes. Guado al Tasso is, of course, Antinori's massive estate. You can see how big it is here. And it is also true that these wines can live a long time. There's other property as well. You see that throughout Bolgheri, because they're, if you will, I mean, 55 maybe sounds like a lot of producers in the consortium. It's not. That's not a lot of people. And certainly a lot of famous names have come here and settled in and proven this area. And I think we can really rely upon their instincts to find the best sites throughout this relatively small space. Now, these orange areas are Ornellaia and Maceto. If you've had Maceto, good on you. It is proof that it's not just Cabernet Sauvignon we're talking about here, but Merlot is extremely special here. And as I've already insisted to you, I think Cabernet Franc can be extremely special as well. These are frankly remarkable wines, and yes, they're very expensive wines, but you know what? Get together with some friends, right? You know, y'all throw some money in the pot and you can get one of these wines. You can have it once and then you're good. Then you know what it tastes like. And you should. You deserve it. You really do. All right. Ornellaia and Maceto, like I said, is just really a favorite of mine. But when it comes to relatively good value, Bolgheri, I think Le Macchiaiole is well worth your time as well. They're bottles that they make, particularly just the Le Macchiaiole bottling, that's relatively inexpensive. Now it's, as you can see here, it's these purple violet sort of fuchsia areas here. And I would highly recommend Macchiaiole. I really think that you'll see, again, what Merlot can do, what Bordeaux varieties can do. Grattamaco is probably less well known. And as you can see, definitely sheltered areas. I certainly think that you'll find great value with that particular house. And Carmaconda, it's the Gaia family, you know. I got my Gaia posed right over my shoulder there. Yeah, I did it for you, okay? And you know what? I think that these wines aren't cheap. I'll grant you that. But you know what? I think they're great values. I honestly do. I think that they represent extremely good wines of great longevity. And I think that the value is there because I think that there's more in those bottles than the price. Now, all of that has to be, I mean, you got to make your own mind up. But I am always charmed by what the Gaia family does. And the property that they built here and the property they put together here, I think is pretty magic. So I'm going to say, you know, that the negotiating house, the haggling house, as it could be interpreted, is an amazing place and makes great wines. Another pioneer, though often less talked about, is Michele Satta. And these wines too, for me, offer you some really good value if you're wanting to explore Bolgheri and you don't want to have to fork over the dollars for Maceto every time, just occasionally, you know, maybe around the holidays. It's an amazing place. It's a beautiful place. The ocean, as you can see, is very nearby, or at least the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Ligurian Sea to the north. And so for me, proximity to the sea is both dangerous and exhilarating and exciting. It is a place that creates these wines that somehow embody this salty, briny character that, not surprisingly, I smell the closer I get to the ocean, but also the Italianate macchi, as it's called. Macchis is the term that the Italians of this area would describe as the scrublands. The scrub, about much as the French would talk about garrigue. Now, of course, the term maquis got taken up by the French resistance. It was the slang term for the French resistance. But it is ever present, and I think in the landscape, and I think ever present in these wines as well. So check them out, see what you think. I would certainly recommend that you explore Bolgheri in all of its richness and at all price levels as much as you can. And I thank you for your time.